Hello.
Hey,
Hello, Dan?
hey,
Oh, great. This is working. I was afraid for a second. Dan Drohan is on the air with us today. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good, good, good. Thanks for joining us. Um, so you're calling us from Massachusetts right now?
Yeah,
How's the weather out there?
it's good. It's finally getting nice. It's sunny and uh, warming up for sure.
So you're in Somerville? You're near Somerville?
Not too far. I'm about 35, 40 minutes from downtown Boston, so a
Okay.
little super farmy town.
Cool. Well, thanks for calling us today. Thanks for hopping on the show. So, just to, I guess, to talk a little bit more about you and your background. So, you're from Massachusetts. Um, you're primarily a drummer. That's kind of your background. Um,
Yeah. Well, I actually am not from Mass originally. My wife is, and I actually grew up in Rochester, New York. Was born in
okay,
Maryland,
right.
but grew up and spent most of my time in Rochester.
Okay, okay. Um, and so you attended. So you started drumming pretty early on, around 7, if I understand correctly. Um, that was kind of your first instrument.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
yeah. I guess just a tiny bit more context. Your new EP Duty Free is out. Um, it's it's one of the many solo projects you've released, and you can really hear sort of some of your background in drumming, and um, it's very sort of unique in how it sounds in terms of all the beats, and it also the way you kind of um, produce. So it's out now. We're gonna play some tracks from the EP, and we're gonna play tracks from your other solo records. We're gonna play tracks from your side projects, your bands, and we're gonna kind of, I guess, cover the entirety of the work you've done in the past. I guess few years that you've been active. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, a retrospective, a Dan Trohan retrospective. But so let's kind of like follow that thread of sort of when you of what your journey has been. Just call it that way. Um, you so you grew up in Rochester. You started drumming. Can you tell us a bit more about what that looked like and like what got you into drums? Were you just kind of listening to records? Were you like a music kid that kind of started studying music really, early on? What how did you kind of start?
Well, I think my parents definitely like really dug on music, and it inspired me super young. I mean, I remember I always shared a room, bunk beds with my older brother Mike, and
Hmm.
we'd be like hanging out at night before bed, like staying up too late and listening to cassettes of like Jackson 5
Uh,
and Elvis and making our own, I remember making our own cassettes and years later listening back to like me and my sister and my brother like on this cassette player with a little mic like being all goofy and funny and then
uh,
yeah, I don't know. I just remember always singing and hanging out. And my dad always was goofy and used to sing to my mom, like, and put on like a Halloween mask and like make us laugh.
uh,
Uh, and I think that just led to it being super natural. Like, yeah, music, not something I even think about. I just love it. And I honestly don't even know, but I was just called to play the drums. Like I remember I was 7
uh-huh.
and I just my mom always tells me the story of I asked for a drum set when I was like 7 from my parents for like Christmas or something.
Okay.
And they set up this kit, and it was from like J.C. Penney's, like a 20 $50 kit or
Like a
something
kid's,
like
like a
that. Super,
toy. Yeah.
yeah, definitely a toy kit. And I came downstairs, and I was like 7, right? And I came downstairs, and my dad was all like right in front of it, like, I set this up for you. And instead of being like, yes, I was like, that's not a real drum set. And they were, like, I'm surprised my parents are still laughing about that, because it's pretty rude. But they actually just like, they knew that I was serious about it back then. They used that story as like, man, you really did want to play the drums. Like,
right.
And we had to figure it out. Like, you were a serious kid about it. And so they helped me, just like follow through with, like, I took band and orchestra at school, and jazz band, and had like a couple little teachers who were like seniors in high school and in the town. And then I eventually got like more serious about it, and got teachers in the city of Rochester, and ended up playing at church every Sunday, which was like amazing experience.
Wow.
And I met one of my mentors, Greg Davis, there actually, who really like showed me jazz, like gave me my first Coltrane record and Chick Corea and all that stuff.
So is that
started all at that age,
And so that was like middle school, high school?
Yeah, totally.
And so that's kind of what led you to study drumming or go study at at Berklee College of Music in Boston?
Yeah, I didn't even know about that college, and I'm sure if I never heard of it, I was going to go to some other school like Fredonia or somewhere.
Syracuse or
or who knows?
Yeah.
And Greg, my mentor, was like, he was actually a trumpet player and a pianist, not even a drummer. And he was just like, no, he knew about it, and he was just like, no, you have to go here, man. And he introduced me to somebody who trained me to like audition, or like, we like built a drum solo and did all that, and it worked. And when I got to Berklee, I was scared because I was really at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah.
Of musicianship.
Yeah.
Or technical ability.
Yep.
But
that's interesting. That I would never think that, but I think this is sort of the cool thing is today, like, you have sort of, through some of the people you've collaborated with, and ultimately, like, your solo music takes things sort of to the the extreme of I guess the left of the spectrum of what you can do with music. It's super experimental, and it's definitely fearless, and but you also have sort of you can reach into sort of jazz and hip hop and even kind of folk. So it's interesting to talk about all of this and see how you have sort of this very simple relationship with the drums that's kind of a common thread throughout all this work, because whether we'll hear in your solo stuff, there's a lot of it is drums, but I think also in the other projects you've been involved with, Unikai or Olden Yoke or Wilson, you're coming in as an arranger and as sort of in a way a metronome. So it's funny to hear you say that you were at the bottom of the totem pole, or that you but that feeling probably is why you end up with this kind of great variety of stuff. But let's start listening to music, because time is running. So we're gonna start out with a song from the album Good Power by your band Elon.
Cool.
We're gonna play Second. I changed it up a bit because I feel like it's a pretty groovy track, and then we'll start kind of talking about we can talk about the album, the EP you just released, and that's out now, Duty Free. And then I want to kind of go into more of your solo stuff that you released recently and stuff that's coming up. So coming up right now, Second by Elon off their album Good Power, released in 2018.
This is the beginning of a lengthy drive. Can you make a map of that? Well, can you imagine being untied? Ooh. Can you imagine pressure of time? It's to see you when we bring about the question of why we could break it. What would that look like? For a second, how does it feel? Does it taste like anything for a second? Behold yourself, make room. The world does not owe you. Hold on, not to dead time. Concern yourself with you. We revolve around the pressure of time. We bring about the question of why we should break it. What would that look like? For a second, how does it feel? Does it taste like anything for a second? Well, behold yourself, make room. The world does not owe you. Hold on, not to dead time. Concern yourself with you. For a
You're listening to Look at My Records. I'm Charlie, and I'm subbing in for Tom today. Thanks for listening. Just a quick word to let you know that we do offer some podcast recording services to people who are in Bushwick, around New York. If you're thinking about starting a new podcast or you just want to get yours out of your home, we offer low hourly rate recording sessions with engineers. So if you're interested in that, you can just contact us or head to radiofreebrooklyn.org/podcast studio. So, hey, Dan, are you still here with us?
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. So we just heard Duty Free 5 off your Duty Free EP that you released on June 25th. And before that, we heard Second by your band Elon. So can you tell us a tiny bit more about Duty Free and sort of some of the influences behind your production, your kind of sound, and just kind of give us some insight into what the EP is sort of about.
Sure. This EP is definitely a concept of like its own. It's just kind of like its own whole idea of the way I hear music and want to explore and experiment with music in general, and the palette and the technique behind creating and composing and using the laptop is like a large part of that exploration. All of the EP has been based off, basically it's all recordings of my drums, and the same kit that I use for Alon, actually. So the track you heard before, you can hear this piccolo snare and super upfront dry kick drum and a crazy ride, and that's it. It's just a 3-piece. And so Duty Free is as if I'm like playing other instruments. I'll manipulate like a snare mic and create like form or whatever. I'll just do whatever like my ears are kind of, I let my ears kind of guide me to place, you know, and the end result of Duty Free is like, at some point I decided to stop, but there was also months after I quote unquote bounced that EP and the versions of those tracks. I later even went further with them and experimented even further until they're probably just like rubble.
Yeah.
And you know, but
yeah, I think that's what is sort of kind of great about listening to this is sort of the way you kind of build the soundscape and you're able to find sort of music in sort of these like avatars of your own sort of drumming. And it's definitely a whole trip to listen to the EP. It's, you know, it goes sort of to very different sort of places sonically. And this is sort of a kind of a wilder, kind of brighter track. There's like, I feel like there are tracks that are tiny bit, you know, it's sort of almost like listening to it is like looking at different aspects of the same entity, but kind of each track, the 5 tracks, have their own kind of feeling to them. And that is what I feel like is very interesting with what you do is sort of you kind of keep it to the raw idea of what a track can be, which is sort of endless declinations, or I guess of who you are as a musician. And it's very refreshing. It's really cool. So to go back, you made that link between the two tracks with Drum Kit, and it's I think it's important to to follow that thread. So how did you meet with the other members of Elon, and yeah, kind of run us through that, and tell us a bit about you know, a lot of you've collaborated with so many people, so I want people to kind of hear about yeah, I guess how these how you make these connections.
Well, I think most of the connections in my life have been just very serendipitous or meant to be, and you know, I think that that's all a really important view of those relationships, and the view I have in life, and how I think, you know, God's kind of guiding it all, and opening, you know, he'll open doors and I go through them, and sometimes I don't. But with Alon, for instance, the guitarist Bobby, also known as Spike, also known as Bobby Johnston or Robert Johnston or Rob, and he is an awesome guy, and he approached me because I actually met him in person 2 years after I worked on one of his tracks. He worked with this other friend, Nick Hakim, at a restaurant in Brooklyn, and they were like hanging out, and Nick heard Rob making some music, or heard something, and heard a song called Sweet Georgia Brown, and Nick and his producer, another really close friend of ours and another collaborator of mine, Andrew Sarlo, the two of them came over and recorded drums. I recorded drums on Bobby's song, Sweet Georgia Brown, and nothing really came of it. I'm sure there's a recording somewhere. Nick or Sarlo has it. And then 2 years later, and I never met Bobby in person. 2 years later, okay, I got hit up by Bobby, and he was like, "Hey man, I love seeing all the Bermuda Kid stuff that you're posting online," which is like one of my solo monikers of weird experimental drum stuff. And he was like, "Hey man, can we meet up?" And we met up, and we just immediately hit it off, talked about like Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes, and just music that's happening now, and what's not happening now, and what should be, and what we want to do. And then he introduced me to his, the bassist Derek and Bobby grew up together in Ohio. And Alon, who's the lead singer, she's dating Derek, and they met in New York, but she's also from Ohio. So I'm this little outsider to the crew, and the three of them were playing with another guy, David Watts, and he moved back to Ohio or to LA, and so that's how I met that crew. That's
a funny name, David
about
Watts.
5 years ago.
Okay, so I wanna, and I mean I feel like what is interesting about hearing these two tracks is with Elon, I feel like you really explore the more jazz, even hip hop sort of aspect of what you do, and the solo stuff is it is as sort of, you know, it's sort of left field, but it's much less poppy, and it's much more electronic and experimental, and I think it's just great how you're able to do both. So before we leave, because we're running out of time, I want to play a track from your previous album, Physical Knowledge, called Bout Bout, and I want to play a song that you've shared with us today that isn't released, called Leave It Loading, that is supposedly off your upcoming album. So I want to leave you guys with these two tracks. So this is Bout Bout off Physical Knowledge, and after that we will be playing Leave It Loading off the upcoming album called You're a Crusher. Dan, thanks so much for being here today.
You, Charlie.
Yeah. We'll definitely have Dan again on the program. You guys should check out some of the bands he's worked with. He's worked with Uni Ika on their album Keeping a Golden Bullseye in the Corner of My Mind. He's drummed and contributed to the Olden Yoke's self-titled album. Olden Yoke, you've contributed to Taishi's Crawl Space, Wilson Sirens, Anglo's Life Goes Down EP. So if for listeners listening today, check those out. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Dan. Have a good day.
Hey, thank you.
Okay, cool. If you ever don't know just how to do something, I'm here to tell you that you can.